Jason had always been the kind of guy who liked to test people, to see just how far he could push them before they snapped. It wasn't that he was a bad person, but he had a way of enjoying the game of making others uncomfortable. There was a certain thrill in watching someone squirm, in seeing how far he could go before they stood up to him. And when he saw Sarah for the first time, he knew she would be just another easy target. At least, that's what he thought. She was sitting alone at the corner of the cafe, a cup of coffee in front of her eyes lost in thought as she stared out the window. The rain had been pouring for hours, and the sound of the droplets hitting the window made everything seem quieter, calmer. But Sarah, she was anything but calm. There was something in the way she sat, the stillness in her posture that caught his attention. She wasn't like the others who came and went, chatting and laughing. She had an air of mystery, something Jason couldn't quite figure out, and that only made him more interested. He approached her slowly, the usual cocky grin on his face as he leaned against the table. He had no reason to believe she would be any different from the others he'd pushed around before. Most people either ignored him or gave in to his charm. But Sarah, she didn't even glance at him. She just kept staring out the window as if he wasn't even there. That was the first thing that intrigued him. "Hey," he said, his voice smooth. "You're looking pretty lonely over here. You want some company?" Her eyes didn't shift from the window, but her voice, when it came, was calm, almost cold. "If you touch me again, I'll be the last person you ever touch." Jason blinked, surprised at how serious she sounded. Most people would have laughed it off, maybe even blushed. But Sarah, she didn't flinch. She didn't smile. Her words hung in the air like a warning, the kind that wasn't meant to be ignored. Jason chuckled, trying to brush it off. "Come on, don't be like that. I'm just trying to be friendly." She turned slowly, her eyes finally meeting his. They were blue, sharp, intense. And in that moment Jason felt something he hadn't expected. A chill ran down his spine. He wasn't sure if it was the way she looked at him or the way her words had landed, but there was something about her that wasn't like anyone else. She wasn't scared. She wasn't impressed by his usual tricks. And that in itself made her dangerous in his eyes. "You don't seem to understand," Sarah said quietly, her voice steady. "I'm not like the others, don't touch me." Jason stood there for a moment, the cocky grin slipping from his face. But then he laughed it off, as he always did. He wasn't the kind of guy who backed down from a challenge, and this felt like a challenge. He stepped closer to her, his hand reaching out toward her shoulder. "You know," he said, his voice now low and teasing, "there's something about you. It's almost like you're daring me to touch you." Sarah didn't move. Her gaze never wavered from his, and her expression remained unchanged. It was as if she were sizing him up, weighing his intentions, deciding whether he was worth her time or not. "Do you think I'm joking?" she asked, her voice suddenly sharper. "I told you, don't touch me." Jason didn't listen. He had been warned, sure, but this was Jason, and he wasn't someone who took no for an answer. As his fingers brushed her arm, a sudden surge of something, anger, fear, adrenaline, shot through him. Before he could even react, Sarah's hand shot out and grabbed his wrist with a strength that took him by surprise. Her grip was like iron. Jason's eyes widened. He had expected resistance, but not this kind of force. She wasn't just some quiet girl who would shrink away from him. She was holding him in place like she had all the power, and for the first time, Jason wasn't sure what to do. She was different. She wasn't scared of him. For a moment they just stood there, her hand around his wrist, their faces inches apart. Jason could feel the heat of her breath, the weight of her stare. His heart began to race, and a strange feeling of vulnerability crept into his chest. "I warned you," Sarah said, her voice low but firm. "I don't need you and I don't want you, so stay away." Jason tried to pull his wrist free, but her grip didn't loosen. It only tightened, and for the first time in his life, he felt something like fear. Fear of being held in place, fear of being made to realize that he wasn't the one in control. After a few seconds, she let go, her hand dropping to her side. Her gaze never left his, and the intensity of it made Jason feel like he had just been put in his place. Next time, Sarah said quietly, her tone colder now, don't make the same mistake. Jason stood there, stunned, as she turned back to the window. The rain was still pouring outside and the cafe felt quieter than ever. He didn't know what to think. He didn't know what had just happened. But one thing was clear. Sarah wasn't someone you could just mess with. And for the first time in a long time, Jason wasn't sure if he wanted to be the one who tested her again. Jason couldn't stop thinking about Sarah. After that strange encounter in the cafe, he found himself unable to shake the image of her face, the cold, calm eyes that had looked at him with such intensity, the way she had warned him. No one had ever spoken to him like that before. People usually laughed when he teased them or got nervous and backed off. But Sarah, she didn't flinch. She stood her ground, and it left Jason feeling something he wasn't used to, respect. Still, he couldn't let it go. There was something about her, something that made him want to break through her walls. He wasn't the kind of person who lets someone stand over him, not without trying to knock them down. He had a reputation to maintain, and no one could break that, especially not a girl who didn't seem impressed by anything he did. A few days later, Jason saw Sarah again. This time she was walking alone on a quiet street just after work, her head down, her long hair swaying with each step. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still gray, and the cool breeze made him shiver. This time, he wasn't going to just watch from a distance. He wasn't going to let the memory of her stand there, in that cafe, haunting him. He had to make her see that he wasn't afraid of her warning. He caught up with her quickly, his footsteps echoing in the stillness of the street. Sarah didn't look up at him when she heard him approach. She seemed to sense him, but she didn't acknowledge him. Jason stopped just behind her, standing there for a moment before he spoke. "You're not going to ignore me again, are you?" His voice was teasing, but there was an edge to it now. He wasn't just playing anymore. He was determined to get a reaction. Sarah finally turned her head, her eyes meeting his. The same cold gaze, the same unyielding strength. But this time, there was something else in her expression. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was a deeper anger that hadn't quite shown through before. "I warned you," she said quietly. Her voice was calm, but there was something heavy in it, something deeper. "Stay away." Jason didn't move. He didn't step back. "What's the matter, Sarah? You scared of me?" She didn't answer right away. For a moment, Jason thought maybe he had finally pushed her too far. But then, without any warning, she turned toward him fully, her eyes narrowing. "You don't understand," she said, her voice low but filled with a force that caught him off guard. "I'm not scared of you, but I don't like being tested." Jason felt his chest tighten. He had expected her to be angry, maybe even to yell at him. But this was something different. Sarah wasn't afraid, and she wasn't going to be bullied into submission. The realization hit him hard. She wasn't like the others. He took a step closer to her, his gaze still locked with hers. "I don't care if you like it. I just want to know what you'll do when I don't listen." The words felt like a challenge, but as soon as he said them, he felt a strange unease settle in his stomach. This wasn't fun anymore. This wasn't a game. He was crossing a line, and part of him knew it. Sarah's eyes flickered with something dangerous, something Jason couldn't place. And before he could even react, she reached out and grabbed his wrist. Her grip was hard, strong, the kind of grip that told him she knew exactly what she was doing. "I told you," she said through gritted teeth, "don't test me." Jason's heart pounded in his chest. He had never felt this way before, this vulnerable, this unsure. Her hand around his wrist was like a steel trap, and he couldn't move, couldn't escape. There was power in her, raw and untamed, and it was more than Jason could handle at that moment. For the first time, he realized how much he had underestimated her. He tried to pull his wrist free, but she wouldn't let go. The tension in the air was thick, like the calm before a storm. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Jason was frozen, caught between frustration and awe. Finally, Sarah let go, her hand dropping to her side. She took a step back, her eyes never leaving his. "I don't like to repeat myself," she said quietly. "Next time, don't make the same mistake." Jason stood there, staring at her, his wrist still stinging where she had gripped it. His mind raced, trying to process what had just happened. He had expected to scare her, to make her uncomfortable. But instead, she had turned the tables on him. She had made him feel powerless. She had made him feel something he couldn't control. For a long moment, he didn't know what to say. The confidence he usually wore like armor had cracked, and he felt exposed. Sarah turned away, her back to him, her steps measured and calm. She didn't look back. Jason watched her walk away, her silhouette disappearing into the distance. He stood there for what felt like forever, trying to make sense of what had just happened. One thing was clear: Sarah wasn't someone to mess with. She wasn't going to back down. And maybe, just maybe, Jason realized that was exactly what made her so powerful. She wasn't like anyone else he had ever met. And in that moment, something shifted inside him. Maybe, just maybe, he was the one who needed to learn something from her. The days that followed were harder for Jason than he expected. His usual cocky smile had faded, replaced by an unease he couldn't shake. He found himself thinking about Sarah constantly, about that one moment when she had looked at him with those cold, unflinching eyes. The way she had grabbed his wrist so effortlessly, so powerfully. No one had ever made him feel so out of control, so helpless. And for Jason, that was a feeling he wasn't used to. He was always the one in charge, the one who called the shots. But Sarah, she was different. He couldn't stop asking himself why. Why had she made him feel that way? Why had he let her? It wasn't just the physical strength she had shown, though that was enough to catch his attention. It was the way she had stood up to him, the way she had refused to let him push her around. Jason had always been able to get people to bend to his will, even without trying. But Sarah, she had no fear. She didn't care about his reputation, his jokes, or his teasing. She wasn't impressed by his charm. And that made her more fascinating to him than anyone he had ever met. The more he thought about it, the more he realized he wasn't done with her. Jason wasn't the kind of guy to back down, not when he'd been challenged. And Sarah, she had challenged him. He spotted her again one afternoon, walking through the park near their school, her head down, her pace steady. She looked peaceful, lost in her own world. And for a moment, Jason wondered if she had forgotten about their previous encounters. Maybe she had moved on, not thinking twice about him. But Jason wasn't ready to let go. He was determined to break through the wall she had built, to make her see that he wasn't someone who would just disappear. He approached her from behind, his footsteps deliberately loud against the concrete. Sarah didn't turn around, but Jason could tell she knew he was there. She always seemed to know. He stood beside her for a moment, letting the silence stretch between them. "Hey," he said, trying to sound casual, "you've been avoiding me." Sarah didn't respond right away. She just kept walking, her gaze forward. But Jason could see the way her body tensed just a little, as if she were preparing for him to do something. He smirked. Good. She hadn't forgotten. "I'm not afraid of you," he said, the words coming out almost challenging. "You know that, right?" This time Sarah stopped. She turned her head slightly to look at him, her expression unreadable. The same calm, cold look. Jason could feel the weight of her gaze, like she was seeing right through him. "I never said you were," she replied quietly. Her voice was calm, but there was something underneath it, something like warning. "But if you think you can get under my skin, you're wrong." Jason's grin faltered for just a second. He had expected her to laugh, maybe even to mock him. But instead, she was standing her ground again, not backing down. That's when it hit him. She wasn't like anyone he had ever met. No one had ever stood up to him like this. "I'm not here to get under your skin," Jason said, his voice softer now, as though he was realizing something. "I just want to see what happens when I don't leave you alone." Sarah raised an eyebrow as if she were sizing him up. For a moment, the world around them felt distant. The noise of the park, the chatter of people, it all seemed to fade into the background. It was just the two of them now, standing in the middle of it all, staring at each other. "Why?" she asked simply, her eyes never leaving his. Jason took a step closer, his heart pounding. He didn't know why he had to do this. He didn't know why he couldn't just leave her alone like everyone else, but something inside him refused to walk away. He was caught in her gaze, trapped in the pull of something he couldn't explain. "Because I want to know what you'll do," he said, the words coming out more honest than he meant. "Because I want to see if you can keep pushing me away." Sarah stood still for a long moment, her gaze unwavering. Jason could see the wheels turning in her mind. She was thinking, calculating, trying to decide whether or not she should walk away. But she didn't. Instead, she stood her ground, her chin lifting slightly as if she were silently daring him to take the next step. "I don't need you to prove anything," she said, her voice steady. "But you're making this harder for yourself." Jason smirked again, this time with more respect in his eyes. She was stubborn, just like him, and that made him want to push even harder. He stepped closer, his face only a few inches away from hers. "You don't get it, do you?" he said softly, almost whispering. "I like a challenge." Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly, her lips pressing together into a thin line. For a moment, Jason thought she might just walk away, like she had done the first time. But instead, she reached out and gently placed her hand on his chest, pushing him back just enough to create a bit of space between them. "I'm not a challenge," she said, her voice low but firm. "I'm a person, and I won't let you treat me like some game you can win." The words stung more than Jason expected. He took a step back, suddenly feeling smaller than he had in a long time. He had never been good at backing down, but Sarah wasn't giving him any choice. "Fine," he said, his voice quieter now, the cockiness slipping away. "But I won't stop until you see that I'm serious." Sarah looked at him for a long time, as if she were searching for something in his eyes. Finally, she gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Then we'll see," she said simply, before turning away and walking off, leaving Jason standing there in the park, watching her retreating figure with a mixture of frustration and awe. For the first time in his life, Jason didn't feel like the one in control, and for the first time, he didn't mind. Jason couldn't deny it anymore. He was intrigued by Sarah. It wasn't just the way she looked or the way she carried herself. It was something deeper. She had this calm, unshakable strength that made him feel as if he'd never quite understood the world. His usual tricks, his usual ways of getting attention didn't work on her, and that fascinated him. The more he saw her, the more he realized that she wasn't someone to be won over easily. But it also frustrated him. Jason had never been the type to back off from a challenge. And Sarah, with her icy gaze and quiet power, was the biggest challenge he'd ever faced. She hadn't backed down when he tried to push her. She hadn't flinched when he got close to her, when he tried to make her feel small. Instead, she had stood firm, almost daring him to keep going. One afternoon, after a long day at school, Jason saw Sarah walking alone again. She was heading toward the park, her head down, her footsteps slow and deliberate. The rain had started again, gentle at first, but the dark clouds were gathering quickly. Jason didn't think. He just acted. He started walking toward her. By now, the familiar sense of excitement was back, but this time it felt different. Jason wasn't just trying to make her feel uncomfortable. He wasn't playing a game anymore. He was doing something he never thought he'd do. He was going to confront her. "Sarah," he called out, his voice louder than usual. She didn't stop walking, but she didn't ignore him either. She turned slightly, enough to acknowledge that she heard him. "Not this again," she said, her tone flat but with an edge of weariness that made Jason stop for a moment. He hadn't realized until then how tired she sounded, how much she might be trying to avoid this. But Jason wasn't going to let it go. "I'm not going to stop, Sarah," he said, his voice steady, almost pleading. "I don't know why, but I can't leave you alone." Sarah stopped walking. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Jason's tone, his honesty, was different from what she was used to. He wasn't mocking her this time, wasn't trying to make her feel small. There was something raw in his voice that made her hesitate. She turned fully to face him, her eyes narrowing but her expression softer than before. "Why? Why won't you just leave me alone?" Jason stepped closer, the rain now falling more steadily around them. The park was mostly empty, just the two of them standing in the middle of it, surrounded by silence. He could feel the tension in the air, thick enough to suffocate them both. But he didn't move back. He didn't want to. "Because I'm not used to people like you," Jason admitted, his voice quieter now. "You don't just give in. You don't care about what people think or what they want you to do, and it drives me crazy." Sarah felt a pang in her chest. He was being honest, maybe for the first time since she had met him. She had seen him before, the confident guy who walked through life with a grin on his face, making everyone laugh, pushing their buttons just because he could. She had assumed he was just like the others, that he was no different, but hearing him speak like this made her wonder if she had misjudged him. She shook her head, not wanting to let her guard down, but unable to stop herself from feeling a strange pull toward him. "You think that makes me special?" she asked, trying to sound unaffected. "You think I'm something you can figure out, that I'm just a puzzle for you to solve?" Jason looked at her, his expression serious now. "Maybe, but I'm starting to think that I'm the one who's the puzzle." Sarah stood still for a moment, taking in his words. She knew what she wanted. She knew how she had built walls around herself to keep people from getting too close. But Jason, he was relentless. Every time she pushed him away, he came back stronger. She wasn't sure if it was bravery or stupidity that made him keep coming, but she couldn't deny that it was affecting her. "I don't need you to solve me, Jason," she said, her voice firm. "I'm not a mystery. I'm not something you need to win." Jason's jaw clenched. "I don't think you get it. It's not about winning. It's about showing you that I'm not like the others. I won't back off, not this time." The rain continued to fall around them, but Jason barely noticed it. The only thing that mattered now was Sarah. She was no longer just someone he wanted to tease or challenge. She was someone who had gotten under his skin, someone who had made him question everything he thought he knew about himself. Sarah took a deep breath, her expression softening just a little. "You keep saying that, but what do you really want from me, Jason?" For a moment, he didn't know how to answer. What did he want? He had been playing this game for so long, pushing and pulling, teasing and challenging. But now, standing in front of her, he realized he didn't know what he was supposed to want. "I want you to stop seeing me as the guy who just makes fun of you," he said finally, his voice quieter than before. "I want you to see that I'm serious." The silence between them stretched on for a moment before Sarah finally spoke. "You don't know what serious is," she said, her voice softer now, but with a sharp edge to it. "If you did, you wouldn't be standing here like this." Jason took a step back as if her words had struck him. She was right. He didn't know what serious was. He had always kept things light, always avoided real feelings, always treated life like a game. But with Sarah, it was different. She was forcing him to face things he didn't want to face about himself, about who he had been and who he was becoming. "I know I don't know everything," he said quietly, looking down at the ground for a moment before meeting her gaze again. "But I'm trying, and I'm not going to stop." Sarah looked at him for a long time, her expression unreadable. And for the first time, Jason wasn't sure what she was thinking. But somehow that felt okay. He wasn't trying to control her anymore. He was just standing there, hoping she would see that he was serious. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. Jason hadn't expected it to happen like this. After everything, after all the challenges he had thrown her way, Sarah was still standing firm, still not backing down. He had thought that if he kept pushing, if he kept coming at her hard enough, she would eventually crack, would finally let down her walls. But the more he saw her, the more he realized that Sarah was not someone who could be broken. Not by anyone, not even by him. He wasn't used to this feeling. Jason had always been the one in control, the one who made the rules, the one who decided how things would go. But Sarah, she was different. She didn't care about his rules. She didn't care about his confidence or his games, and that unsettled him more than anything. It was another rainy afternoon when he saw her again. The skies were overcast, the rain falling in sheets, but Jason couldn't seem to get her out of his mind. He had been trying to act normal, trying to let it go, but he couldn't. Not when every part of him wanted to know her better, to understand what it was about her that made her so untouchable, so unreachable. Jason spotted Sarah walking through the park again, her pace slow, as though she was in no hurry to get anywhere. Her dark hair was wet from the rain, but she didn't seem to mind. She looked calm, collected as always, lost in her own world. Something about the way she moved, the way she carried herself, made Jason feel like she was a force of nature, unstoppable, unmovable. He didn't know if he hated that or admired it. He hesitated for a moment, standing on the edge of the path, unsure if he should approach her. But before he could think twice, his legs were already moving, taking him in her direction. This time he wasn't going to play the same game. He wasn't going to challenge her. He wasn't going to make her uncomfortable. This time he just wanted to talk, to connect. When Sarah heard his footsteps, she didn't turn around at first. She kept walking, her focus still on the path ahead. But then, as he got closer, she paused, her shoulders tense as if she already knew who it was. Jason stopped just a few feet away from her. "Sarah," he said, his voice soft, hesitant. She turned to face him slowly, her expression unreadable. "You're persistent," she said, her tone neutral. But there was a hint of something deeper in her voice. Something that made Jason pause for a second. She wasn't angry. She wasn't annoyed. But there was something in her eyes, something that told him she was tired of the game. "I don't know what it is about you," Jason admitted, his voice quieter now, almost apologetic. "I just can't seem to let this go." Sarah didn't say anything for a moment. She simply looked at him, as if she were trying to figure him out. The rain continued to fall around them, the sound of it blending with the quiet tension between them. Jason couldn't help but notice how the water made her look even more distant, like a person who existed in another world, far removed from everything around her. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice low, almost a whisper. "Why do you keep coming back?" Jason took a deep breath, his heart beating faster than he liked. "I don't know. Maybe it's because you don't play by the rules. You don't care about what people expect from you. And I've never met anyone like you before." Sarah's lips curled into a small, almost sad smile. "I'm not someone to be figured out, Jason. I don't need you to understand me. I don't need you to make sense of who I am." Jason's stomach tightened. "I know you don't, but I can't stop myself from trying." There was a long pause as Sarah stared at him. Her expression softened for a brief moment, as if she was seeing something different in him, something real. For the first time, Jason didn't feel like he was trying to prove something. He wasn't playing games. He wasn't being the guy who always had to be the winner. He was just standing there, vulnerable in a way he never allowed himself to be. "I don't want to hurt you, Jason," Sarah said, her voice soft now. "But I can't be what you want me to be. I can't be what you're expecting." Jason felt a strange ache in his chest. He had never been afraid to chase after what he wanted. But standing here now, facing Sarah, he realized he had been chasing the wrong thing. He had been so focused on getting her to notice him, to let him in, that he hadn't stopped to ask himself if that was what she really wanted. If that was what he really wanted. "I don't want to change you," Jason said quietly, his voice full of sincerity. I want to be someone who matters to you, even just a little." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, her blue eyes studying him with a quiet intensity. For the first time, Jason wasn't sure what she was thinking. He had gotten used to seeing the defiance in her gaze, the walls she kept up to protect herself. But now, there was something else. Something that made him wonder if she was starting to understand him, just as much as he was starting to understand her. "I don't need anyone to matter to me," Sarah said finally, her voice firm. "I've been fine on my own for a long time, but—" she paused, as if choosing her words carefully. "But I can't deny that you've made me think about things I didn't want to." Jason's heart skipped a beat. He had been expecting her to reject him again, to tell him to walk away. But she didn't. She was acknowledging something, something he hadn't thought she would ever admit. "I'm not going anywhere," Jason said, his voice low, almost a promise. And I'm not going to stop trying, not until you see that I'm serious." Sarah's lips parted, and for a brief moment Jason thought she might say something that would push him away for good. But instead she just gave him a small nod. It wasn't a smile, it wasn't a declaration, but it was something. It was progress. Jason couldn't help but feel like, for the first time, he wasn't the one forcing this connection. It was happening slowly on its own terms. And maybe, just maybe, that was all he needed to know. For the first time, he wasn't chasing after a prize. He was just waiting for the moment when Sarah would let him in. And this time, he wasn't going to rush it. The weeks that followed were different. Jason didn't fully understand it, but something had changed between him and Sarah. He wasn't sure if it was because he had started seeing her in a new light, or if it was because she had begun to see him differently. It was subtle, like a slow shift in the air, but Jason could feel it every time they crossed paths. She wasn't as distant as before, but she wasn't warm either. It was like there was a thin layer of ice between them, something that kept them from getting too close, but also something that made everything feel real. Jason stopped trying to force the connection. He didn't push her anymore. He didn't try to challenge her or make her uncomfortable. He just waited, and in that waiting something strange happened. He found that he didn't need to constantly fight for her attention. She was there, present, even when she wasn't saying much. And that in itself made all the difference. One evening, after a long day, Jason found himself walking down the same path in the park where he had confronted Sarah weeks ago. The rain had just stopped, but the sky was still covered in dark clouds, threatening to pour again at any moment. He hadn't expected to see her today. He wasn't looking for her. But when he saw her standing near the fountain, her face turned toward the sky, as if she was listening to the quiet rhythm of the world around her, he couldn't help himself. He walked toward her. This time there was no hesitation in his steps. He didn't feel the usual nervousness, the need to prove something. He just wanted to be near her, to see if they could have a real conversation this time, without any games, without any walls. As he approached, Sarah didn't turn around at first. Her back was to him, her figure almost blending with the soft gray light of the evening. It took everything in him not to speak, not to break the silence. But when she finally turned to face him, it was like she had been expecting him all along. "Jason," she said quietly, her voice soft but with a hint of something he couldn't quite place. "You're always showing up when I least expect it." Jason gave a small smile, but it wasn't his usual cocky grin. It was genuine, even a little shy. "I guess I can't stay away." Sarah raised an eyebrow, and for a moment there was that familiar edge in her eyes, that guarded look. But this time, Jason didn't feel threatened by it. It wasn't a challenge. It was just Sarah standing there in front of him, trying to figure him out, just as he was trying to figure her out. "Why do you keep coming back?" she asked, her tone still curious but with a hint of something softer. "I thought you were done pushing me." Jason's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected that question. He hadn't expected to be asked why, because honestly he didn't know. He just knew that being near her, even in silence, felt different than anything he had ever felt before. "I don't know," he said honestly, his voice quiet. "Maybe it's because I can't figure you out. Maybe it's because I've never met anyone like you. Someone who doesn't let the world define them. Someone who doesn't care about the rules." Sarah's expression softened just a little. The edge in her eyes faded, and for the first time Jason saw something vulnerable, something real that she rarely showed anyone. It was almost like she was letting him in, just a little. "I don't need you to figure me out, Jason," she said, her voice calm but filled with a depth he hadn't expected. "I don't need anyone to understand me. I've learned to live with myself, even when no one else gets it." Jason stepped closer, his heart beating faster now. This wasn't like the times before. This wasn't a challenge anymore. This wasn't about proving something or breaking down walls. It was about understanding each other on their own terms. "I'm not trying to understand you," Jason said quietly, his voice full of sincerity. "I'm just trying to show you that I'm not going anywhere, that I'm serious about this. About us. Sarah didn't look away this time. Her gaze held his, steady, searching. Jason could feel the weight of her words, the vulnerability in them, and it made his heart ache in a way he hadn't expected. There was a part of him that had always kept things light, always kept people at arm's length. But with Sarah, he felt like he was being drawn closer to something deeper, something real. She looked down for a moment as if gathering her thoughts, and then she took a deep breath. When she looked up again, her eyes were different. They weren't as cold, weren't as distant. There was something warmer in them now, something that made Jason feel like maybe, just maybe, she was starting to see him differently too. "I told you before," Sarah said quietly, "that I wasn't someone you could control, that I wouldn't be just another thing for you to figure out. But I also told you I wouldn't push you away forever." Jason felt a rush of hope fill his chest, but he didn't want to say anything, not yet. He didn't want to ruin the moment, didn't want to rush her into something she wasn't ready for. Instead, he just stood there waiting. And then Sarah did something unexpected. She reached out, her hand brushing gently against his arm. The touch was light, almost tentative, but it was enough to send a shiver through him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just stood there in the rain-soaked park, the world around them quiet as if holding its breath. "You're not the only one who's been trying, Jason," Sarah said softly. "But I need to know that you're not just here for the challenge, that you're here because you really want to be." Jason nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm here because I want to be with you. I don't know what this is, but I'm not leaving, not unless you say so." For the first time, Sarah smiled, a small, almost shy smile that reached her eyes. It wasn't the cold, guarded smile she usually wore. It was something warmer, something real. And in that moment, Jason realized that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't about winning or losing. It wasn't about pushing or pulling. It was about two people who, despite their differences, had somehow found a way to be something more than just the walls they had built around themselves. As Sarah let her hand rest on his arm, Jason felt something shift inside him. The final touch had been made, and for once it didn't feel like a game. It felt like the beginning of something real. Jason couldn't believe how much things had changed in the past few weeks. When he had first met Sarah, he never imagined he'd end up standing here, in the middle of the same park where they had argued, the same park where she had told him to stay away. He had tried everything, teasing, challenging, even pushing her away himself, but nothing had worked. Sarah had always been a mystery, a wall that he couldn't break. And now, here he was, realizing that maybe it wasn't about breaking through at all. Maybe it was about standing beside her as equals, even if the walls were still there. Jason stood quietly watching Sarah as she walked a few steps ahead of him. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still overcast, the heavy clouds lingering in the distance. Sarah looked calm as always, but this time there was something different. There was no tension in the way she carried herself. There was no wall between them anymore. Jason had stopped trying to figure her out, stopped trying to push her into a box that he could understand. For the first time, he was seeing her for who she really was, and it was more than he had ever imagined. Sarah wasn't someone who needed saving. She wasn't someone who needed fixing. She was strong, independent, and everything he had always admired but never fully understood. But now, after everything, he felt like maybe she was starting to understand him too. He caught up to her slowly, walking beside her this time, not in front, not behind. There was no rush anymore, no need to prove anything. They walked side by side, their footsteps in sync as they headed toward the park exit. "You know," Jason said, breaking the silence, "I never thought I'd be here, walking beside you like this." Sarah glanced at him briefly, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Why?" "Because I'm not the kind of girl you usually win over," she teased lightly, but there was no bitterness in her voice. It was a soft joke, something they could share now, a sign that the tension between them had finally melted away. Jason chuckled, shaking his head. "Something like that," he said. "You've never made anything easy for me, Sarah, and I'm glad for it." She didn't say anything for a moment, but he could feel her looking at him. She was studying him just like she always did, as if she could see right through him. And for the first time, Jason didn't feel exposed. He didn't feel like he was being judged. Instead, he felt understood. "I think I needed someone to make things hard for me," Sarah said quietly, her voice thoughtful. "I've spent so much of my life keeping people out, building walls, shutting myself off. And for the longest time, I thought that was the only way to survive. But with you," she hesitated as if searching for the right words. "With you, it felt different, like maybe I didn't have to keep everything in." Jason's heart thudded in his chest. He had always known there was more to Sarah than the cold exterior she put up. But hearing her say it out loud, hearing her admit that she had been fighting the urge to open up, made everything feel clearer. He wasn't trying to break her anymore. He wasn't trying to win her over. He was just there beside her. And that was enough. "I'm not going anywhere, Sarah," Jason said, his voice steady, his eyes meeting hers. "Not unless you tell me to." She stopped walking for a moment, turning to face him. The soft smile on her lips deepened, and for the first time Jason saw a real vulnerability in her eyes. Not fear, not walls, just the raw truth of who she was. And for the first time he didn't feel the need to fix it to make it better. He was okay with it just the way it was. "I won't tell you to leave," Sarah said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I need you to understand something. I'm not perfect. I don't have all the answers, and I don't know how this is going to work. But if you're willing to stick around, if you're willing to see me, all of me, then maybe we can figure it out. Together." Jason's heart swelled at her words. It was everything he had hoped for, a chance to be with her, not as a game or a challenge, but as two people who had finally stopped fighting and started seeing each other for who they really were. No more walls. No more games, just honesty. "I'm willing," Jason said without hesitation, his voice full of emotion. "I'm willing to see you, Sarah, every part of you, and I'm not going anywhere." Sarah's eyes softened, and for a moment they just stood there looking at each other. There was no more need for words, no need to say anything else. They both knew what they wanted, and in that moment that was all that mattered. Jason reached out, gently placing his hand on hers. It wasn't forceful. It wasn't a challenge. It was just a simple gesture, a connection. And Sarah, after a brief pause, let her fingers wrap around his. It was a small act, but it meant everything. The rain started to pick up again, but this time they didn't mind. They stood there together, side by side, feeling the rain soak through their clothes, but it didn't matter. They were there with each other. And for the first time, Jason realized that maybe this was all he had ever needed. To be understood, to be accepted, to not have to fight anymore. As they walked away from the park, hand in hand, Jason didn't feel the need to push Sarah anymore. He didn't need to challenge her or make her prove anything. He was content with the person she was. And for the first time, he was content with the person he was becoming too. No more games. No more trying to win. Just two people who had finally found each other in the middle of all the chaos, and that was enough. "Thing worth fighting for,"